All right, here we go. And I'm going to be sharing my screen. Before we begin, I'm going to mute everybody. Let's see. All right, looks like everybody's muted. All right, so if you have any questions throughout the course of the workshop, if you would put it in the comment box or the chat box. If it's directly speaking to what we are covering, then I'll go ahead and answer it. But the majority of questions I'm probably going to wait to do during the Q&A section. So again, this is being recorded. You will be sent this recording tomorrow along with additional resources. So let me talk to you about a couple of things that I'm going to suggest that you do during the course of this workshop. So it's very easy and common for us to come into any kind of fair fighting workshop and just think about all that our partner has done or all that our previous partners have done that was unhealthy or unfair when they fought. Unfortunately, you can't fix or change or control any of those people, but you can fix, change, or control you. So while you may want to point all the fingers because they did blank and they did blank, I'm going to encourage you to really look at how you fight and how that looks in your relationships, because it takes two people to tango, right? So if your partner or your previous partners had unhealthy and unfair fighting styles and you stayed in those relationships, it's very likely that you had them too. Further, we'll talk more about how to set boundaries and things like that in behavior, but it only takes one person to change how you and your partner fight. So even if it's just one of you, that's hugely valuable. All right, so let's get going. For anybody who's come in, please go ahead and mute yourself. And if you have any questions ongoing, put them in the chat box and I'll answer from there. All right, this is me. I'm sure that most of you know me in some way, either social media or this kind of stuff. But I'm a certified relationship coach. I have coaching certifications. I also have a bachelor's and a master's degree. I'm also an author. My book, Grateful in Love, came out last year. And then I have 2 books coming out this year, Reclaim and Recover, Heal from Toxic Relationships, and a couples goals journal. So my goal is always in working with individuals and couples on how to improve their relationships to go from toxic to happy. And this learning how to fight is a very valuable and important tool in a relationship. So let me talk to you a little bit about me and why I care so much about teaching healthy fighting skills. So fights when I was growing up in my home, and many of us, that's where we learned how to fight in our particular homes. We learned from how our parents fought, our caregivers, our other close family friends. That's how we learned to fight. And more often than not, we didn't have the best role models. My family growing up was very violently and verbally abusive. There was screaming, there was name calling, there was throwing things, there was breaking things, and there were also physical violence. And I thought that was the norm. I just thought every family did that. I know it didn't feel good. I know that I was hiding bruises when I was going to school, but I just thought it was the norm. I just thought that's what every family did. So my family operated where we'd have these horrible blowout fights. And then between fights, there'd be this uncomfortable tension where we were waiting and watching for the next fight to happen. And that tension became so much sometimes that when I grew older, like a teenager, I would cause fights because at least I would know when the fight was going to be and I didn't have to worry about waiting for it anymore. And of course, so much of that was extremely unhealthy. And despite all of my effort to not bring that into my adult romantic relationships, I did. I brought it into all of them. So in all of my romantic relationships, there was yelling, there was name calling, there was blaming, there was threatening to break up, any kind of altercation. There also was a lot of conflict avoidant behaviors that were also extremely unhealthy because I wasn't communicating, I wasn't being honest, I wasn't being clear, I wasn't taking responsibility. And we'll talk more about that too, because both sides of unhealthy fighting is both participating in fights too much in ways that escalate, but also in avoiding conflict at all costs. So today, how fights look in my relationship look nothing like they did before. I wouldn't even call them fights based on my previous definition. My husband and I regularly have healthy, calm discussions. We come to compromises. We come to solutions. We thank each other for not yelling at each other and being respectful. And we treat each other with respect, whether we're mad at each other or not. And And I tell you that not just to brag, like, oh, I've gotten there and you haven't yet. It's really because it's a miracle. And that took a lot of work on both of our parts to get to that place today. And I've seen on my own life and in my clients' lives that learning these tools can and does change and improve relationships. So what is unfair fighting? So this is just a very quick summary, which I'll go into detail later, but the unfair fights are loud. So there's screaming, there's yelling, there's raised voices, there's mean tones, they're bitter. So there's blaming, there's lots of defensive language, there's lots of you statements like you did this, you're a jerk. They're unproductive, as in they keep happening over and over again, or they never seem to come to a compromise. It's just sort of a blow up that just never goes anywhere. And sometimes they're violent. And I define violence here by, violence can be verbal abuse, emotional abuse, gaslighting, and physical, whether it's someone being violent in front of you, like throwing things, or physical altercations between the two of you. So I'm going to go through the very specifics of unfair fighting. Again, I'm going to remind you to think about what you do in your fights with your current partner or previous relationships. This isn't just about thinking about what your partner has done wrong and making a laundry list. This is about looking at what you do wrong, because you can control and change your own behaviors to improve your relationship. So the first thing I'll mention is bad timing. So this could be like you want to cause a fight as soon as they're right before they're leaving work, or right before bed, or while they're at work, or while you're at work. So bad timing. Blaming. So you did this and you're wrong and it's all your fault. Bringing up too many things at once, and I'll address this later, but we like to think we can multitask, but we really can't. And it's been proven in science and so many scientific studies that multitasking is just a lie. So we are better set up for success in anything by focusing on one thing at a time. What generally happens when we're fighting is we end up bringing up all of the things we're upset about, and then nothing gets resolved. So bringing up too many things at once, another unfair fighting tactic. All right, I'm going to have to explain this one, but only talking about anger. When we're angry, or when we're mad at our partner, that's a primary emotion. But more often than not, that is it's really a secondary emotion. We're angry, but we're also sad and lonely and upset for other reasons. And if we don't address and talk about all of the feelings that we're feeling, then we won't actually address the real issue that's going on. Not being specific. Okay. So the way this can show up in relationships is you might say to your partner, like, I'm so tired of you being so rude or so picky. Now, you may think that those are specific because you have a specific incident in mind of when your partner was rude or picky and it irritated you. Unfortunately, your partner may have a different definition of what rude or picky or whatever might be. And so they can't fix or change their behavior in a way that would help or improve the situation because they don't know what kind of specific thing that's bothering you. So it's very important to be clear of like what you saw as rude and what you see as picky, so your partner can actually change that. All right, shutting down, the silent treatment, stonewalling. So shutting down, the silent treatment are the same. Stonewalling is when the silent treatment lasts for 24 or more hours. Okay. And stonewalling is considered psychologically abusive, incredibly mean to our partners. Now, shutting down the silent treatment, that is often a normal reaction to feeling psychologically overwhelmed. So when a fight happens, your normal response may be to tune out, to stare at the TV, to stare at your phone, to just not think anything at all. And that's a normal response. The way this gets into unfair fighting is we do not communicate that to our partner. So they think, oh, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to figure this out. And you've checked out. Okay. So the way it gets to be unfair is because we're not communicating that, hey, I can't participate in this right now. I need a break. I just can't right now. Next one is interrupting. And we'll talk more about this later, but our basic goal in any kind of fight is we want to be heard. And so when we're interrupting someone, we're not hearing them. We're trying to speak over them. And it's, we often see it in power dynamics and power struggles. But of course, that doesn't make our partner feel heard and valued when we're doing that. Empty threats and ultimatums. And I want to put the focus on empty. So we might say out of anger, like, I want a divorce, I want to break up, I'm so tired of this, I'm not going to do this anymore. That's fine if that's what we actually feel and we intend to follow through with that. Like, I want to break up and then I'm going to follow through by, in fact, moving out and I'm done. What ends up happening, though, is if we give an empty threat, we say, I want a divorce, and then the next day we're still living there, and the next day and the next day, it really ends up hurting our relationship because our partner is uncertain about, what do they say that is honest? And did they really mean that? And why did they not really mean it? And so many of us believe that what we say when we're angry is what we truly feel. But for many people, that's not the case for them. Many people say things because they're trying to win. They're trying to hurt their partner's feelings. They're trying to end the conflict. And it's not coming from a place of, what they actually seriously want to do. So escalations, and I refer to escalating behavior as yelling, screaming, throwing things, huffing, storming around. Those are kind of escalating behaviors. Those ones are very clear examples of unfair fighting. But again, I'm just covering all of them. So you can be aware, again, of what you do in your fights. And lastly, no resolutions. So this is where a fight happens and nothing's really addressed with it. Either you don't sit down and have a conversation, there's no apology made, nothing happens of it. It's like the fight never happened. And unfortunately, there's usually a lot of hurt that needs to be processed, especially if unfair fighting was done. And there probably needs to be some compromises or proposals that need to be handled differently too. All right, so most people, I'm not going to say that everybody, falls into some of these unfair fighting styles. And again, this is for you to think about what you do. Most people have a primary fighting style, and then some people jump between several fighting styles depending on the relationship, whether if it's with their parent or their child, or this partner versus another partner. And they may even in the same fight change their fighting style. So I've given some silly names to them because why not? So these are the first set. These are the conflict avoidance. Okay, so these are the people who hate conflict. They're going to avoid it as at all possible. They are going to do all that they can to avoid conflict because conflict is bad. That's their internal belief. So the first one I have for this is the tightrope walker. The tightrope walkers do not tell the whole truth. They lie, they fudge details, they minimize, they don't voice their needs, all with an intent of keeping their partner happy and avoiding conflict as much as possible. So they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, they're going to fudge the truth, withhold the truth, all of that. That's their dance. And really that's what it is, to try to keep the peace, even though that's very stressful and walking on a tightrope. The next conflict avoidant is the pacifier. So the pacifier jumps to apologies. I'm so sorry, you're right, I did that. But it's not very genuine. Their intention is stopping the fight as quickly as possible, getting to yes, getting to happy and resolving times, but they don't intend on changing any behavior. They just intend on stopping the fight right then. So pacifiers are, you might call them yes people, or the ones that are going to cow down, however you want to view it. But these are the people, they just want the fight to stop, but they're not going to do or change any behavior, and they don't have any intention to. The other one, and I think a lot of us fall into this pattern, is the pot on the stove. So these are people that the first time something happens that irritates them, they're not going to say anything. They're like, oh, I'm making too big of a deal out of it. I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to cause a fight. And then it happens a second time and they're irritated, and a third time and they're more irritated, and a fourth time and a fifth time and a sixth time. And then finally, these people just blow up, and it's a huge deal that, whatever happened. Another way that I might see this is these people blow up in a fight about another thing. So they've kept it together. They haven't told their partner anything about what's been irritating them. And then suddenly a fight happens about something else, and they bring up this litany of things that they are super upset about. Okay. So these are the pot and the stoves. I feel like many of us fall into this category, but you may prove me wrong. And here we get in the conflict aggressors. Okay. So conflict aggressors, conflict is necessary, but only if I win. Okay. The first one is the blamer. I know all of us have met a blamer at one point. These people are never responsible for anything that they do. They always have someone or something else to blame, whether it's you or, traffic or any kind of thing. They are not going to take responsibility for their behavior, and they will get loud, storm off, super angry to avoid taking responsibility. Another one is the bulldozer. Okay. This is actually the tendency that I fell into. So bulldozers believe that they're right and everyone else is wrong. And they will go to great lengths to prove everyone wrong. They will, during a fight, they'll pull up Google or YouTube or record you and then play it back. They'll do all that they can because their whole purpose is to show that they are right. That's all that matters to them, is that they're right. They don't care about the peace in the relationship. They don't care about compromise. They just want to be right. Our next conflict aggressor, and notice I put a picture of good old Mr. Putin, but these are the destroyers. So these people believe that they have to win at all costs. So these people, when they fight, whether this is you or someone you're familiar with, when they fight, they are going to pull out all of the stops because they can't lose. Losing is terrifying to them. So they need to win. So these might be people that throw out their meanest phrases, the meanest comments, threaten to break up, say they hate you, that kind of thing. And that's all an effort to win. They don't want to lose, even at the cost of their relationship or really hurting their partner. Then there's after the fight responses. These are the two unhealthy responses to after the fight. The grudgers. Okay. So when we hold a grudge, generally it means that something is not resolved for us. What happens with a grudger is even if something seems to have been resolved to their partner, they continually bring it up to sort of hold it over their head and weaponize it. Like, you told me this, and why didn't you do this? And if something has happened in the relationship that someone does not feel has been resolved, there should be a separate conversation about it. Definitely. We should, if something doesn't feel resolved to both people, there should be another conversation about figuring out a resolution. But sometimes grudgers just don't want to. They enjoy holding on to that and using it against them because it makes them feel in control or feel in power in the relationship. The other option is the under the rugger. Under the ruggers are going to pretend like nothing happened. Everything's perfect. They're going to be confused why, or you are going to be confused why your partner's still upset the next day when to you, the fight ended and we've moved on and nothing really happened and it's all okay. So these again are two unhealthy responses to those unfair fighting. So let's get into fair fighting. And let me just take a pause here. If you have any questions about unfair fighting, I mean, you're here because I'm certain that you know what unfair fighting is. But if you have any questions from what I talked about, please put them in the chat box so I can answer as we go. And then we will have a Q&A time at the end. So what is fair fighting? Fair fighting is not going to look like what you may be familiar with. Healthy discussions, no escalation, strict rules to keep the peace, and to come to agreeable solutions. Okay. So many of us, this is going to seem really weird It's going to seem uncomfortable, and we're not necessarily going to like it. I have worked with clients before who have told me, but I like to fight, or I want to do that. And that's all fine. That's all fine and good. If you want to keep doing what you're doing, go for it. I'll tell you that though, fair fighting with our partner is a lot more kind, loving, and respectful in a relationship. It's much easier to repair and reconnect after a fight. It's much easier to feel close, connected, emotionally safe in that relationship. There's so much that can continue and grow in your relationship when it's not hurt or damaged during ugly fights. So there are 3 key beliefs of fair fighting that differ from unfair fighting. So unfair fighting, the focus is on either avoid conflict at all costs, or if conflict happens, I have to win. So 3 key beliefs of fair fighting sort of push against that. The first is that conflict is inevitable, and it's true. Every relationship will have conflict, whether it's with your sweetheart, your friend, your neighbor, your family member. Anytime we have a relationship, conflict is going to be a part of it, because that's how we learn how to communicate and be better with them. All right, so I see a chat box. All right, so a question from Alice. Do you have any advice on figuring out my unfair fighting style / behaviors? If most of the time when I fight with my partner, I can't keep track of my thoughts, what I've said, and get a bit confused, overwhelmed. So Alice, that's a great question. I will be sending an additional resource that has you sort of look at your unfair fighting style. I would see that as a type of shutting down. So in that case, it might be more a tightrope walker, or I would guess a tightrope walker, really. In fights, if you find that you're feeling flustered, overwhelmed, that's such a shutdown response. And so I would see it as that, but we can explore more when we get to the Q&A section too. Thanks for the question. So the next key belief of fair fighting is we each have needs that are valid. So conflict aggressors and conflict avoidance both believe that, conflict is or isn't great, but that there needs to be a winner. Someone needs to win, someone is right. And that ignores that there are 2 people in the relationship, and both those people have needs that are both valid and should be recognized. And lastly, that we can both win. Fair fighting, the biggest difference between fair fighting and unfair fighting is a focus on the problem instead of seeing our partner as an enemy. And that's one thing I want you to think about, whether you're in a relationship or not, is do I see my partner as my teammate instead of an enemy when we fight? That needs to be the goal, is seeing each other as a teammate. When you're on a team, if you're whatever sports team analogy you want to use, you're working together for a common goal. Your common goal is to have a better, healthier, happier relationship. Okay. So that's your goal. But if you see each other as enemies, you're just going to tear the team apart. And that goal of a better, healthier, happier relationship falls to the wayside. So it's important to think about and join in beliefs that way. So we're going to talk about a fair fighting agreement. So this is what I mentioned when I was talking about the rules to keep the peace. Okay. And this is one such way to do that. And I'll just tell you, in all of my work with clients, it's a take what you like and leave the rest. So I'm presenting you a lot of information today. You can figure out what works for you in your relationship. Every relationship is unique and different. So I'm not telling you you have to do it this way, because there's no special way to do it. There are just lots of different options and different tools. And so I'm providing you all of those options so you can figure out what's best for you and your partner, or you and a future partner. The other thing I'll say about a fair fighting agreement is that it works. So I've seen it used again and again with people. So if there's something you're a little nervous, if you're a little nervous of trying it, there's literally no harm in trying it. None. So the first thing that you're going to do with the fair fighting agreement is write a list of all unacceptable fighting behaviors. And I've written the most common ones that I see. Now, I want you to, again, focus on yourself. Okay. So what are the things that you find unacceptable and how you fight? So yelling, raised voices, mean tones, name calling, other degrading language, threatening to break up or divorce, blaming or other you statements, bringing up past incidents. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if something keeps coming up, it's an issue that needs to be addressed, okay? But that needs a separate conversation. So if you're fighting about the dishes, it's not the time to talk about, well, you talked to that girl on Instagram or whatever. Talk about just the dishes and then have a later conversation about talking to the girl on Instagram. Physical force or other acts of violence, stonewalling, shutting down, the silent treatment. So you will figure out what are unacceptable behaviors for you, as well as for you and your partner, if you're going to come up with this agreement together. Another thing I want to point out is that these are boundaries. Boundaries are for you. They are not for your partner. Okay. So the way boundaries work is that we control ourselves, our thoughts, desires, reactions, goals, dreams, whatever. And our partner's job is to control their thoughts, desires, dreams, goals, actions. Okay. So the way that we have power of how our fights look is we do not have to participate in conversations or fights that have these unacceptable behaviors. And that's how the boundary rolls in. So instead of saying, don't yell at me, okay, that most people would think that that's a boundary, but in fact, it's not, because you're relying on someone else to do that action. So that's more actually a request. Don't yell at me. That's actually a request. The boundary would be, I will not participate in fights where there is yelling. Okay, so that's the boundary, and your behavior, your consequence that will happen if someone else yells. The other important part is you can't say that you will not participate in fights where there is yelling and then you go and yell. So it's about holding firm to your boundaries, both in you doing them and then not participating if someone else does them. So that means, okay, you don't yell. It means if someone else yells, you end the conversation and walk away, and we'll talk about that. Those two need to be part of that, okay? That you are not violating the boundary by yelling yourself, and also that you are not participating in the conversation anymore. If someone is yelling at you and you keep talking in a level voice, that is still violating your own boundary. And then if you are yelling back, obviously that's violating the boundary too. But you are saying, I will not participate in this fight anymore if they're yelling or something else takes place, okay? So make sure you're coaching it and thinking of it in that way, because that gives you the power to make different choices in how you fight. The next part that you'll do is a plan for what will happen if an unacceptable behavior occurs. So as I mentioned before, the whole I will not participate if yelling occurs, okay? Generally, that not participate needs to look like a timeout. Okay, so a timeout ideally needs to be between 30 and 60 minutes, but not more than 24 hours. This is not I leave and we never talk about it again. It's I take a break and then we come back and talk about it. That's what it needs to be. Again, I'm giving you examples. Timeouts don't work for some couples. A timeout, let me just define that first, but a timeout is a moratorium. You're not talking. You're not texting. You're not participating at all in anything to do with the fight. If there's something that needs to be discussed, like something to do with your kids or pets, that can be discussed, but everything about the fight needs to be left on the table until after the timeout is over. So again, that's 30 to 60 minutes, but not more than 24 hours. One or both of you can physically leave. If that activates the other partner, which can happen, it would be important to say, I'm not leaving the relationship. And you also need to communicate that timeout. Like, hey, I need a timeout of 30 to 60 minutes. Let's talk at 4 p.m. And I'm not leaving the relationship, but I'm going to take a walk around the neighborhood. That's how that can sound and look. But it needs to be communicated to your partner what you do, when you will be back, and then you need to be back at that time. You've made a boundary, you've set it, you need to follow through with that. If you're not ready to talk when you come back, that's fine. Just say to your partner, hey, I know we said we would talk at 4. I'm not ready yet. Can we talk at 5 instead? Okay. The other option is a time in. Some couples really like this. I could never do this. If I'm mad at my husband, I'm not spending time with him. I'm not doing a time in. So a time in might be like you and your partner go on a walk together or you journal together, but you're spending that time together, not fighting, but doing some kind of activity together is usually how that's defined. And again, it would need to be between 30 to 60 minutes of that activity, whatever it might be. And you're sort of taking a break from talking about or addressing the fight, but nothing in regards to the actual fight. All right. I think I covered everything for that. And there's more I'll address with this as we go. The last thing is it's helpful with your fair fighting agreement to have a plan for re-engaging. And I give an example. Again, this is something that you can work out for yourself and your relationship. So the example I give, once the timeout or time in has ended, we will ask, are you in a place to discuss this now? If one of us is not, we will schedule another time to talk about it. If we are both ready to talk about it, we will hug each other before discussing. Many couples benefit from having some kind of re-engagement because again, the goal is that you guys are a united couple. You're a team, not that you're enemies and you have to sit on opposite edges of the couch and that kind of thing. This takes work and practice and it's uncomfortable. I totally get it. I've had to do it myself. I get it. But I will tell you that all of the research, and they've based it on decades of marriage research, has shown that these kinds of behaviors help solidify relationships, help them move past fights, help them stick it out with each other. And a fair fighting agreement seems very structured and weird, but once you get the hang of it and start putting it into practice, it becomes more second nature. And then it's not something you really need to use or look for because it's just a part of your relationship. My husband and I do not sit down every time we have a fight and be like, oh my God, you violated the behavior. It's just a natural part of our relationship that we do not yell at each other. We call timeouts as necessary. It's just a natural part of our relationship today. All right, how to practice fair fighting. So I want you to notice this picture, okay? So I put a picture of a dirt road. So the way our brains are is our brains have a quality called neuroplasticity. So notice that the word plastic is in that word. Plastic just means malleable, okay? So when you've repeated a behavior over and over again, for example, an ugly or unhealthy fighting habit, it's like you're driving the same way to work every day. That route is ingrained. You could do it on autopilot. When you start a new behavior, it's like going down a dirt road for the first time. It's bumpy. It's not done well. You have to think about really hard to make sure you go that way. You have to pay attention and concentrate so you're not, getting rocks kicked up. But the more you drive down that dirt road, the more it's going to be rutted, the easier it'll be for you to traverse it. It'll come more naturally for you to drive down it. That's how your brain works in learning new habits. So as you're applying these healthy, fair fighting skills, it's going to be bumpy at first as you adjust and transition, but with time, it will be easier and become more second nature. Okay. So do not feel discouraged if it's hard, if it's difficult, if it feels uncomfortable, if it's weird. It's really supposed to, because it's your brain doing something totally different. I know this for myself because I spent my whole life as a child and then later as an adult in relationship being a total, I don't want to cuss, but there's lots of cuss words that I could use to describe the kind of person I was in relationships when fighting, as I was aggressive, I was a bulldozer, I was mean, I was really hurtful, and I'm not like that way at all today. And I had to learn not to be that way. And it's something that's been very valuable in my life. So here are fair fighting rules. Okay. So these are the rules just in general. These are not something you would write in your fair fighting agreement, but these are the rules of what it means to fairly fight, what it means to fight in a healthy way. Setting a time to talk. So for many people, not everybody, this helps people prepare accordingly. So nobody's feeling blindsided. And again, it's not like right before someone leaves for work or over text while someone is at work or right before bed. So you say, hey, I really want to talk about the dishes, or, spending Thanksgiving with your mother? Can we talk about it at 5 o'clock tonight after the kids are in bed? Both people know what's happening. They can prepare accordingly. And ideally, you would self-soothe or do whatever you can to sort of take a breather and prepare for that. Number 2, focus on the problem. What tends to happen, as I mentioned earlier, is someone gets upset and they get lost in all of these other things. Okay. So we might want to talk about Thanksgiving to see someone's mother. Okay. We may think the problem is that our partner doesn't like our mother, and we get super upset about that. But the problem that our partner is bringing to us is, when are we going to see their mother for Thanksgiving? And, when are we going to leave? When are we going to drive there? How long are we going to spend? If we stay focused on, I don't think you like my mother, that's not going to address the actual problem that our partner is wanting to talk about. So being able to rein it in, and more than likely it will be one of you doing that work, reining it in. There's usually one person in every argument that's a little bit calmer than the other one. So focusing, being able to say like, hey, I know that that's upsetting to you and that you think that, but I really just want to talk about going to your mother's at Thanksgiving and when we would leave. Stick to one thing at a time. As I mentioned, like, we're just not gonna, if we're talking about going to Thanksgiving at the mother, and then we're also talking about how someone doesn't do the laundry, it's just, nothing's going to get resolved. Express all of your feelings, not just anger. I'm really worried that we won't see my family as much. I'm worried that the kids will be stressed out and really tired because they're going to be spending so long in the car, whatever it might be. Being able to express the range of emotions instead of just anger. Propose a change. Okay. So this is where we suggest what we would like. I would really like it if we saw your mother, in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, and then we left at 2 and went home for a break and then went to my mother's, or whatever it might be. So proposing that, not as a, this is what we're going to do, but as a, what do you think? Describe positive consequences. Like, for example, in the example I'm using, if we do it my way, okay, the kids will be less fussy. We'll get to see both families equally. And then you and I can have some alone time that night, because we won't be as exhausted, being able to describe those positive consequences. And people always feel better about positive consequences than negatives. And do timeouts or time ins, whichever you decide if escalation happens. And then you want to end an agreement, counter proposal, or postponement. So an agreement is in, your partner likes your proposal. It's like, cool. Counter proposal, your partner makes a suggestion of like, what about if we do this instead? And you agree with that or not. Or postponement. And when you postpone something, there needs to be a time when you're going to talk about it again. Not just like, we're going to talk, I don't want to talk about this right now. There needs to be a, well, when would we talk about it? Can we talk about it tomorrow after you get back from work, or after you've had some time to decompress? When? So again, sticking to having those conversations. So I teach my clients a lot, the basics of nonviolent communication. The book Nonviolent Communication by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg is a great book. I suggest everybody read it. It's just a way to communicate with anybody in our lives, in a way to de-escalate situations, a way to be very clear, concise, and specific in our language, in a way to best get what we want, whatever that might be, our goals, etc. And as I mentioned earlier, we all want to feel heard, valued, and respected. And that should always be our goal when we have any kind of conversation with our partner, is that we hear them, we value them and respect them, and that we feel the same from them. So the basics of nonviolent communication comes down to these 4 things in this order. And I'll give you an example of how these look. So the first one is observation. This is where we're just sticking to facts. We're saying the facts of whatever the problem is, whatever we want to address with our partner, just the facts. We're not judging it. We're not making character comments about it. We're just sticking to observation. The next is our feelings, and not just anger, but all of them. Our needs. And these needs are those things like, I need to feel loved. I need to feel cared for. I need to feel like you're excited to see me. Things like that are more intangible. And lastly are our requests, is what we would like. So this is more of that proposal aspect too. So here's an example. An observation. Remember, we're sticking to facts. Okay. You walked in from work and didn't say hello to me when you saw me in the kitchen. Okay. What we might commonly say would be, you're so rude. I can't believe you walked in and didn't say hello to me. Okay. You're not going to get anything accomplished with your partner if you start out with something with you're so rude, right? But we stick with observations. You walked in from work, didn't say hello to me when you saw me in the kitchen. Here we get into the feelings. I felt really lonely and sad when you did that. Okay. And notice I statements here. I feel is really ideal for any communication you have with your partner. I feel blank. If we say, I feel that, that is introducing a thought. Okay. We don't want to introduce thoughts generally. We want to introduce our feelings because that's how we have a better way of connecting and helping ensure our partner is less defensive when they respond to us. This is also called, from Dr. John Gottman's research, soft startup. So this is ways of de-escalating defensiveness in our partner, being very clear in our communication. So we, again, I statements, we're clearly expressing our observations, the facts of what we saw, our feelings. Lastly, our needs. I need to feel that you love and care for me. And the context is when you got home and you didn't say hello to me, I did not feel those things. And lastly, the need is, or the request. Can we start a ritual of love where we hug or kiss each other whenever we get home? So if you're not familiar with the term of ritual of love, I've done a lot of work for it. I also offer a free resource on my website on rituals of love. Rituals of love are things that you and your partner commit to doing, even if you're mad at each other. So these could be like this, where you hug and kiss each other whenever you get home, or you hug or kiss each other goodbye. It could also be making them a morning cup of coffee, always picking them up something when you're at the store. These are little things that you do regardless of how you're feeling about them at that moment, because you know on a whole, you love, value, and respect them. And so rituals of love can help you guys repair after a fight, reconnect, and just continue your partnership. I also need to mention how to formulate a proper apology. So it looks like this cut off at the end, but I can fill that in. So when we come back together after a timeout, generally if we did something that caused a timeout to happen, we probably have to apologize for something that we did or said. And I got really good at doing these because I had to do them a lot when I was learning how to do fair fighting. So a proper apology has to have three things. First is true remorse. I'm so sorry. I love you so much. True remorse means we're sticking to what we did. We're not blaming, excusing, justifying, rationalizing what we did alone. True ownership. I should have never said that. It was mean and hurtful. We're not saying I did that because you did that. We're saying I should not have done what I did. We're only owning what we did. That's it. And lastly, a plan for a change in behavior. I will do better at bringing up my feelings when they happen instead of waiting and getting upset about it later. So all three of those things are the best way to form an apology. All right, helpful ways to avoid / navigate recurring issues. And it might feel good to know that every couple has recurring issues. And actually 70% of the issues that you and your partner face will be what are called unresolvable or perpetual problems. So these are what, again, the Gottman Institute, which is founded by Dr. John Gottman, who's done decades of marriage research. These are what he says are perpetual or unresolvable relationship problems. So differences in neatness and organization, finances, religion, emotions, emotional expression, frequency of sex, sexual styles, time together, time apart, household chores, raising children, disciplining children, family relationships, socializing, ambitions, work, independence, how much to drink, and preferred activity level. So 70% of the problems you and your partner face are unresolvable or perpetual, and they are often due to personality differences. They really are. So for these, there are really 4 ways to approach these, and we'll start with some. So accept it, realize that your partner isn't bad, and that may just be a quirk of theirs. And this really depends on the specific issue. It really, just kind of depends. So some things you might be able to accept about your partner. For example, my husband cannot go into the kitchen and close cabinet doors behind himself. He just cannot. It's not because he's doing it to be malicious to me or he's a bad person. It's really because he's neurodivergent, he has ADHD, and he just doesn't think like that. So if he opens a cabinet and then goes and does something else, that cabinet door stays open. It's just a quirk of his. I could be mad at him all day, but it would not stop him from forgetting to close the cabinet doors. That's just him. It's just what he does. He's not doing it to me. The other aspect that we talked about is coming up with some kind of compromise. So for example, if you guys have difference in raising children, it could be that you come to compromises where you both sort of give in or you both win. So if one of you has a certain religious belief, you attend both services, or you attend one service this week and another service the next week, trying to find some balance with those kinds of things. This one is the one I think and value the most, is brainstorm solutions or alternatives. So for example, if cleaning is an issue, almost every couple has one person who's neater than the other. I can live in a high degree of filth while my husband is he's pretty a neat and organized guy. Okay. So we could bicker at each other all the time if we wanted. Okay. So, but that's not what we've chosen to do. We've chosen to sort of accept it and work through it. If cleaning is an issue in your relationship, if you're like my husband and me, where one of you is like a slob and the other one isn't, you could create a routine. You could focus on certain areas of the home to keep those clean. You could hire a housekeeper, or one of you could give up your certain level of cleanliness. Okay. So in my home, there are certain areas that are sort of mine to mess up, and my husband has full reign and I help. The rest of the home is neat and clean, but like my side of the bed, total trash, and my bathroom area, total trash. Okay. So finding a compromise for us. We also did hire a house cleaner to help with those kind of areas. I will say that depending on your means, purchasing things can help. For example, I had a couple where the husband was always leaving the lights on, and it irritated the woman to no end. They were constantly having fights on. They installed those lights that turn off by themselves, motion detector lights, the toilet seats that go down themselves. There are so many options that can be purchased to make your life and your bickering stop. Another example is a self-cleaning litter box. If you're fighting over who cleans the litter box, then maybe it'd be a good idea to purchase a self-cleaning litter box. But brainstorming alternatives. The fourth option, and I didn't include it on here, but the fourth option is deciding if it's a deal breaker and thus ending the relationship. Okay. So that's always the fourth alternative, is if you feel that you cannot accept, come up with a compromise or find an alternative solution that works for you. The other option always is to end the relationship, because that is a deal breaker for you. Okay. Another tool that I suggest to couples to use as a way to mitigate fights and improve communication is a weekly relationship check-in. So this is something you prioritize every single week. You do it the same time every single week. You can do it in person, over text, FaceTime. All that matters is that you're prioritizing that time and you do it at the same time. This is particularly, wow, my spelling was a mess here. This is particularly beneficial to my pot on the stove / all the conflict avoidant people, because it gives a space and time to talk about things that is ideally a safe time. So the first thing you and your partner will do when you sit down for your weekly relationship check-in is share 5 appreciations with one another. You look so hot on Friday. Thank you so much for helping with the dishes. 2, 5 things that have gone well in the previous week. These can be with the kids, with your relationship, with work, whatever it might be. You're sharing things about your life with your partner that you may not have shared with them over the week. Last or third, something that has been bothering you or something you'd like to revisit. Okay. During this time, I'm going to tell you again, you need to stick to the I statements. If something's been bothering you, like, I notice I've been getting to the dishes more this week. Again, doing the observations, feelings, needs, and then your requests. The other person's job is really just to listen, and hear. And then if things escalate, timeout. And if there's something you'd like to revisit, this is good for my grudgers. If you are still upset about something, that means something is not resolved for you. If something is not resolved for you, it's not resolved for your relationship. So you might need to find some way to talk about it in a way to come up with a proper solution. What I generally see with my grudgers and with anybody who holds a grudge is that they did not get a proper apology from their partner. So that means that they may need their partner to show true remorse, true ownership of the behavior, and a plan for change. Okay. So that may be a place to talk about and address that. Lastly, is something that would help you feel loved in the upcoming week. Like, hey, I'm gonna be busy on Friday. Can you make me breakfast before I leave for work? So this is a perfect time to, again, connect, communicate, and work through that stuff. All right, so this is actually how I got viral on social media, was sharing this tip. And you may think this is ridiculous, and that's perfectly fine. Don't use it. Take what you like and leave the rest. My husband and I, during the height of the pandemic, made up a character that we would blame things on. And we used Rick Grimes, or Rick from the show The Walking Dead, because we both hated him. So anytime my husband or I or my kids did something that irritated somebody, they would blame that thing on Rick. Now, mind you, these were only small things, like not putting dishes in the sink, forgetting to close a door or something like that. These were not for things that have big consequences. What this did was helped us focus on the problem and not get us as mad and irritated at each other. We were using it like when we'd been stuck in the house for 37 days straight. My kids were home from school. So I would say something like, I'd say something to my kids like, Rick left out all of his toys. We really need to help him put all of these toys away. And my kids would be like, oh yeah. So we'd put all the toys away. And we do it with my husband. Like I'd say, Rick forgot to pay that medical bill. Rick really needs to do that today. And my husband would be like, yeah, Rick does. And it just, again, it was light. It was lighthearted, and it was just really funny. We enjoyed it, and it was helpful for us at that time in our lives. So if this might be helpful for you, try it and see if it works. All right. So I mentioned some of this, and this is the last thing we'll cover for the Q&A. These are common issues that come up with learning how to fight fairly. First one is not honoring boundaries, whether it's you or your partner. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, I will not participate in conversations where there is yelling or in fights where there is yelling. If you are then yelling, you're not honoring your boundary. If your partner is yelling and doesn't respond to a timeout, that's them not honoring that boundary. But the enforcing piece is that you, if you are getting yelled at, for example, need to physically remove yourself. So you might call it timeout and your partner doesn't want to do a timeout. It is almost always the case in a relationship where one person doesn't want to do the timeout. They want to keep talking. They want to get it done now. They don't want to take a break. Unfortunately, they don't get to decide that. Whoever is calling the timeout is the one who is deciding, like, I need a break. So if that happens, you keep repeating, I need a timeout. Let's talk at 4 p.m. I need a timeout. Let's talk at 4 p.m. And then you physically remove yourself and do not participate, engage, no calling, no texting, no talking, period. With doing this a few times, it usually takes at least 3 times for it to start to stick. Okay. Remember, if you've had unfair fighting, you likely haven't been honoring boundaries. So this is about learning how to do that. Next thing, not trying it at all, not doing fair fighting at all, or giving up as soon as it doesn't work. Super common. Okay. First thing I'm going to say is remember, it doesn't matter if you or your partner tries healthy fighting. What matters is just one of you makes the change. Okay. So I definitely suggest that whether you're here in a relationship, both you and your partner are here, or you're here and single, try it. You've got to try it. And if it doesn't work the first time, that's actually really normal. It usually takes at least 3 times for a timeout or anything like that to be successful. Just keep trying. Remember, we're doing that. Our brains are plastic. We're trying something new. We're going down a dirt road. You got to try it. I'm doing it, but they're not. So I'm going to stop. As I already mentioned, this isn't about them. It's about you. It's about you changing your behavior so you are not participating in unfair or unhealthy fights. I know it's hard and it sucks. And we want to give ourselves gold stars. You're like, I'm doing this. I'm doing so amazing. I'm doing all the healthy fighting and they're not. It's not about them. You also don't want to be in fights that don't feel good, that are nasty, that are ugly. And you don't, if you have children, want your children to see that. You want to be a good role model for your children if you have them. So thinking about that as well. All right. Here are resources. You will be, remember, you'll be sent these. This is a great list of books that I recommend for couples who are wanting to learn more communication, more conflict skills, but we are out of time and we're going to move on to Q&A. So if you have any questions, if you can raise your hand, or you can also put them in the chat box and I'll answer as many as I can. Or if not, we'll end early. But I feel like people should have questions. Here we go. Pooja, great question. How to avoid feeling abandoned during or while going into timeout. Okay, this happens a lot. And I'll just stop the share for this. What I'm going to suggest anybody works on is self-soothing. Okay, so being able to tell ourselves, my partner is not leaving me. My partner is coming back at 4 o'clock. They said they're coming back. They're coming back at 4 o'clock. Then figuring out what self-soothing options feel good for you. So self-soothing might look like taking a walk, journaling, coloring, exercising, calling a safe friend. I do recommend avoiding drinking alcohol or doing drugs, as those can escalate fights when your partner returns. But there are some, they're not super healthy, but there's still options like binge watching a show that you really like, focusing yourself on tasks, cleaning. There's so many things that you can do to self-soothe, to focus on de-escalating. All right, Samantha, how do you de-escalate a situation that starts a fight to set a time and have a fair fight? I had several of these, so I totally understand, Samantha. All right, Samantha, the way to focus on this is to keep bringing it up, okay? So some people, whether it's emotional immaturity, their desire to be conflict avoidant, or we can sometimes see it for people who are involved in verbally abusive or gaslighting tactics. They will do all that they can to avoid certain tactics, but the focus needs to be continually on what time can we talk about this? What time can we talk about this? What time can we talk about this? Before you leave, I need to know what time you're going to talk about this. And we see a lot of videos if we're dealing with narcissists or people who have narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. Those aspects can complicate fair fighting generally. And I would definitely suggest looking to resources for further help in those areas. Remember, I'm not a therapist, so I can't help in those specific areas. But in terms of communicating, if it starts a fight, just to set a time, the focus needs to be on setting the time, repeating it, and not letting the focus go off it. And remember, if abuse or any unkindness is happening, you don't have to participate in that, but you still need to have that time set. So being able to call a timeout and then come back. What resources do you recommend to learn about the range of feelings beyond anger, sadness? So one, there's a book by Karen McLaren called The Language of Emotions. That's a really good one where she talks about the whole range of feelings. Often going to see an individual therapist or coach can help you with that too. I literally had to start with a feeling wheel. If you just Google feeling wheel, it will show you all of the emotions and feelings and what bracket they fall into, but it's a way to learn how to specifically talk about and get a language and vocabulary for expressing our feelings. Therese, the last thing I asked my ex was a heartfelt choice of ego versus our relationship. He boastfully stated his ego, thus I walked out forever. Did I do something wrong? So Therese, without a context, that would be hard for me to tell. I don't have a context of your entire relationship. I don't have what happened before this or afterward. What it sounds like to me is that you gave your partner a choice of being with you or not being with you, and your partner chose not to be with you. So to me, yes, based on that little information that your partner said exactly what you didn't want, knowing your response, then yes, I would say so. All right, probably just one more question because we are out of time, but I imagine y'all might have more. You all are also welcome to email me if you have further questions. Again, you'll get an email tomorrow with the recording, some additional resources. The additional resources includes the list of books I recommend. It also includes a worksheet on how you and your partner can figure out your unfair fighting skills. And lastly, sort of a fillable thing if you want to make your own fair fighting agreement. All right. Bye, Alice. Glad you were here. All right, y'all, I am going to sign off. Thank you so much for being here. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to email me. Samantha, you will see it in the recording. I will not submit the slideshow separately. But if there's anything you need from that, fast forwarding the recording would be the way to get that. And I hope y'all have a great Monday, and I will see you tomorrow in your email box.